Hi there, welcome to this mini tutorial looking at how to use the Analog 4 as something less traditional than usual. I tend to use it for soundscapes and traditional things, Berlin school. I use it to control my modular using the CV outs and things, and it's a great little sort of workstation. You can have drums and bass lines and sequencers and pads and things. But I've been wanting to do this for a while, which is just to show you how to use it to create something a bit different, something a bit more abstract, avant-garde, experimental, something a bit stranger than normal. And it's a great little device. It's got some really interesting features that allow you to do this. One of them obviously is the LFO, which has got 2 LFOs and 2 destinations per LFO, so that's fantastic, and lots of destinations on those, lots of choices, so that creates some great stuff. We've also got on the sequencer a whole bunch of things, from parameter locks, meaning every step you can have different things happening, through to sound locks, so the sound can change on every step if you want, and also chance features on the notes. You've got probabilities and things like that, so you can do some things with musically, or not musically, rather on the steps, which can make it sound pretty abstract as well. And then of course you've got lots of other things like different types of waveforms and routing tracks into each other and things like that. But without further ado, let's go on to the first sound. I'll play a short burst of the resulting weird sound and then go into the sound. I start each one from scratch, so I clear each sound before each of the 10 I'm going to do, hopefully 10. So we just start with a basic oscillator 1, oscillator 2 is turned off by default on this horrible sawtooth. But let's get into it. So this first one I'm going to call pitch, CRaZy pitch. Let's call it CRaZy pitch. And it's based on the fact that the LFO, you can set a destination over here of the pitch modulation for oscillator 1 in this case. And if we change the waveform to random, we end up with this sort of sound when I turn the depth up. But first I'm going to let's just make the sound an infinite release so I can show you the effect. So now when I turn the depth up, you can hear the pitches going all over the place. If we slow using the multiplier here, slow the LFO down, you can hear it's all over the place. Obviously we can add effects to that, I'll do that later. But you can hear it's pretty uniform at the moment. If we wanted to make that less rigid, it's just playing quavers or whatever the speed is at the moment. We can also use the second LFO to modulate the multiplier or the speed of the first LFO. So you can see here I press second LFO, and now I'm going to choose a destination LFO. Let's do speed first, and then increase the depth. And now we've got a range of different things going on, different speeds. If I am, let's add a little delay to this. Brings in the stereo effect, with a reverb. And also bring in the second oscillator just to make the sound a bit richer. The thing about the second oscillator, of course, is it's not being affected by the pitch modulation, because if you remember, let's go back to LFO, the pitch modulation destination was oscillator 1. So we've got that constant drone in the background as well, which gives it a bit of interest. If we make the drone a little lower and add some, let's add a little bit of onto oscillator 2, a little bit of PCM, pulse wave modulation, sorry, PWM, and a sub. That way you can do a little mini performance. This one is a sort of combination of a few bits that you may have seen already. I'm not sure in the order I'm going to put these, but it's using the sound lock slight randomization, or probability of something sounding on one of the sound locks on track 1, then turning track 1 down and then feeding that through oscillator 2 of track 2 using that NEI oscillator option. So pretty cool, because once it's fed through oscillator 2 of track 2, you can then do some more processing and modulation of that. So let me show you what that is, because you can create quite a complex sounding abstract piece pretty quickly. So the first thing, track 1, I'm not using that sound. I'm just going to go straight into a sound lock sequence. And we're just using 5 steps here at the moment. And as you know, to do a sound lock, put it into step mode and then just choose different sounds. These are totally unplanned, of course. I'll do some just so that it is working in stereo. Just say for the first 2 there, I'll pan so we can get some separation on them, and the other 2 pan the other way. Right, this is where the magic happens. Turn track 1 down so we can't actually hear it anymore, and then go into track 2, oscillator 2, and choose the NEI thing, which feeds through track 1 into this oscillator. Now if we turn this up and I press a note, I've still got oscillator 1 playing there, so I'll turn that down for a second. But oscillator 2, in fact it hasn't copied the stereo through, because obviously it's oscillator coming through oscillator 2, so that it really depends where that is in the stereo. Well, that's kind of cool, because what we can do now is let's just put an infinite sustain on this release. So anything I do now to oscillator 2, including filtering, will affect that sequence coming from track 1. And we can always go back to track 1 and invisibly, you know, change some of the sound locks. Or the notes, because it's not playing a note sequence at the moment. Back to track 2, oscillator 2 filter. And of course we've got constant notes on track 1, so I can choose all of them and just say I want the probability of any of those playing to be like 50%. Then we're going to get some sustained sounds as well, which is kind of cool. It's always hard to know which sound is doing what when you choose them at random. It's kind of interesting. And now we can, because we're back to oscillator 2 on track 2, we can now LFO, do all sorts of variations, modulation on that. So filtering. Getting a bit of distortion. Not sure where the distortion's coming from, whether the sound locks are just too loud. Perhaps it's one of the limitations of this feeding throughness. So speed the whole track up a bit. Let's make the notes. Let's make the sequence longer with some more notes, more sound locks. Make the probability a bit less for those. Some different notes there. And remember all the changes I'm doing here. So I put an LFO filter onto oscillator 2, which is controlling that whole track. I might choose something else, like for example a square level, oscillator 2 level. The effect here is going to be a very fast on and off. If I choose random, so it's sort of fast on and off of that sequence coming from track 1. Right, this one's using the LFO modulation to create something sort of interesting texturally with the sound. Particularly changing the waveform to create something a bit more industrial and strange. So oscillator 1 initialized. I'm going to put it into low pass mode and then done the filter and then infinite release, just so we can get something, demonstrate what's going on. So LFO 1, the destination for this one is going to be the waveform, oscillator 1 waveform. So that's going to step between, obviously, the different sawtooths, squares and things like that as I modulate it. And depending on the wave, you can hear it's a bit regimented, so we'll go to random and then slow it down and have quite a bit of depth so that it's doing the big switch all the time. Might lower it because I want this to be sort of industrial drone-y type sound. Let's go with that. And likewise, I'm going to do the same with oscillator 2. So oscillator 2 at the moment is just playing a constant tone. So I'm going to do the same with LFO 1, oscillator 2 waveform, and quite a lot of depth. Slow it down a touch. So we've got quite a nice bit of texture going on there. Add a bit of resonance. And I quite like the resonance on filter 2 here. So on LFO 2 I'm going to utilize that. So I'm going to find filter 2 resonance there, and then modulate that and make it random as well. And then the only other thing now is using this same LFO, I'm going to choose the destination of both oscillators level. If I've got that, oscillator X, it's not available, so what I might do is just try the frequency mod, see if that works. Probably not what I want. I still want that drone effect, so I'm going to choose just the level of oscillator 1 for now. The effect is that oscillator 2 will be constantly doing the thing, but oscillator 1 will join in every now and then. So I'll turn oscillator 2 down slightly, and now it just needs a few effects. Definitely chorus to give it that industrial feel. Bit of delay, reverb. So I quite like the constant droning effect of that. If I turn off the infinite release and just play it manually, I'm not sure it's totally experimental, but let's just go with it for now. This one I'm going to call ground control because it's quite a sort of spacey effect type thing. I know it's very easy to do spacey sounds on most synthesizers, but this one gives you a bit more control over, you know, how it develops and evolves and things. So starting with, just to show you the basic setup, I'm going to use a pitch modulation on oscillator 1 again. Quite a lot of them are pitch modulation based, infinite release. So let's pitch oscillator 1. Let's find the pitch modulation, which is there. And it's set on 16ths at the moment. I'm going to do it so it's a kind of random, but very slow. So, kind of regimented. We'll fix that sort of regularity thing in a minute. We'll make the range quite wide by changing the depth control. Right, I'm now going to turn oscillator 1 on and off at different times by going to LFO 2 and then setting the destination of LFO 2 to the volume of oscillator 1, so it's not playing a constant level all the time. So, and I'm going to use a, the important thing is to use a square wave here, so that it's got moments of on and off. If I do full depth, it basically cuts it out completely. Bit of delay on that. And you can hear it's doing some very high frequencies. So I can adjust that, the frequency range, by going to LFO 1 and then pitch modulation depth. Let's filter it slightly. And again, we can control the filtration amount by actually using it the same as the pitch change. It will also give us a random filter effect. So some of the notes will be, you know, softer than others. Right, we've still got the issue that it's constantly playing. So one way of fixing that is to obviously take it off infinite release mode and then play it using the sequencer. So if we set a sequence going, it's quite a slow tempo, 60, let's take it up to about 80. And then just make a decision of, well, in fact we can do it on a very short sequence and probability step it. So let's just put a note on, whoops, note on step 1. And it's still quite regular, but of course we just need to say for this one, on a probability of it's only going to play, I don't know, 40% of the time. Which gives us much more variation in the reverb. This one is, I'm going to call it Nois-e-Jump, something like that. Not very good names. So this is utilizing the fact that oscillator 1 has a noise engine built in. So there's the initial sound. If I press it twice, or if I turn it down and then press the oscillator button twice, it takes me into a little noise menu, and I can turn the noise level up. And when and this sound actually I've got a clear idea of where it's going to go, but we'll see. That's part of the fun of having this endless modulation. So that's the sound, and then one way you can decide on what might be an interesting direction to go on is to see what parameters you've got at your disposal. So we've got a color setting. Go some sort of white noise through to pinky. I'll leave it in the middle for the moment. And then we've got this what looks like sample hold, or feels like a bit depth reduction, that type of thing. So that sounds kind of cool. That might be interesting to play with. So then the next thing is to go over to the the LFO, and to see if that is available as a modulation option in the destinations. So LFO 1, as we go down, oh yeah, there's a noise menu options. We've actually got the sample and hold option as a destination. So now I'm going to increase the depth. Kind of cool. And then obviously it's too uniform on the sawtooth, so we'll go into the random option. So that's kind of interesting in itself if you just put a bit of reverb on that. Pretty industrial. Delay. Probably filter it down a bit. I'll just go into a low pass mode. A bit of resonance. Overdrive it slightly. Slightly less reverb. I'll just turn the main reverb menu, main reverb down a little bit. It's a bit high. Just the volume here. So now we could potentially make that a bit. The pitch has no effect on it. We could try and make it a bit more rhythmic. So I'll just put some steps in this 5/8 time. Make it last a bit longer. I might make the sequence a bit longer, so let's go to 16. So when it goes round to 1, and then occasionally I'll have perhaps something on set 5. Just make the notes probability about 33%, and then copy that one over to say 11. And now increase the sustain. And I can play around with the LFO speed as well by putting a parameter lock on any one of these. So number 5, sorry, I could, for example, make the multiplier much faster. And that one even faster. Let's drop the and we can go crazy by adding more steps in. And we haven't used oscillator 2, so we could potentially bring it in as a bit of a note. But that's a bit too obvious. So let's modulate oscillator 2 pitch using LFO 2. If I can find it, oscillator 2 pitch modulation. This one is, I'm going to call Deip Modulation, or Modulation Deep, something like that. But it's taking the principle that of the two LFOs, one of them, a second one, can modulate the depth of the first one. So we can do a whole bunch of different things on that. And explain what I mean. So initialize sound, go into low pass mode so we don't get too infinite release. bit more top end. Right, so if we LFO 1, destination 1 of that will go to the our old favourite pitch mod, and then increase the depth. And if I slow it down slightly, slow the multiplier down, you can see the depth effect, and this is one way you can sort of decide what type of sound you're after. The depth is, as I go up to 1, 2, about 4 there, it seems to be about 2 octaves, or 1 octave thereabout, up to 8, so 2 octaves, and so on. If I go all the way up to like 128, it's going from the full range, whatever that is on this one, I think it's 8 octaves. So if we set it there, and that's quite regimented, it's just on that triangle wave. I'll put it on a sine wave. Right, now what we can do now is go to LFO 2, and then choose over here the LFO depth A. So that's going to, this one is now going to affect the depth of that. So it's going to vary the range from the low depth of this one, from a very short range, an octave or so, right through to 8 octaves as I increase the depth here. And that's quite regimented as well, because it's on a straight multiplier at a certain speed. Doesn't really matter what I'm doing here. So I'm going to make that random but slow. So now it's going to have the real effect of this super random pitch from 1, because we've got the depth modulation of LFO 1, of this pulse modulation, sort of on top of each other. At the same time, so they're not playing all the time, we can make the other second destination of LFO 2, we'll make that oscillator 1 level, so it's turning it on and off every now and then. And this then comes alive with a bit of delay. And we've got the portamento effect as well, because obviously the two LFOs are slightly out of sync speed-wise. So the pulse, the pitch modulation is at ×4 multiplier, and the random depth modulation is at just a 2 multiplier. If I take them slightly off even further, so I'm changing the speed rather than just the multiplier, they're now totally sort of random. And that's only on oscillator 1, so we can add a bit of noise into that. Which keeps going, of course, because it's not, the LFO is not changing it. And then we can then have, if we wanted, like a drone on oscillator 2. And then rather than keep it this constant drone, we can go to our LFO 1. We've still not used the second destination, so we could use that for a much more subtle pitch variation to give it a bit of vibrato. I mean, we can give it a bit of vibrato just by double pressing oscillator 2 and doing it there. That's a sort of built-in one. Or we can make it a bit more abstract by using the LFO. Change this to oscillator 2 pitch modulation there, and then just a tiny amount. So now here oscillator 2, slightly different. More wavering. So this sound I'm going to call Surprise Me, which is actually less about the sound on track 1 and sort of, you know, sound designing that. It's more about just using the sequencer and utilizing sound locks, and then doing some parameter locks on top of them. But basically what a sound lock is if I just choose a, let's just do a 2-step sequence and you can see it working. When we play it, if I press step 1 and then choose a sound in the right mode, so that percussion sound, and then on step 2 we'll choose something else, and the whole track level. So you basically got 2 different sounds on each step. Obviously we can then press each of these steps and do some parameter locking. For example, a simple one would be panning. So that step 1 is on one side of the speaker, one side of the stereo, and then that one will make the other side. Where it gets interesting is where we have more sounds over a longer sequence of steps, and we then use some probability. So probability, let's make the probability of each of those playing like 50%. And straight away you've got this sort of slightly contemporary semi-generative thing going on. But let's increase the steps. So let's go up to 8. And I'm going to randomly, well, I'm doing the random thing here. It's a shame that we can't parameterize the sound locks through the sound browser. But I'm just going to choose some more different sounds, just totally at random. I don't know which ones I'm choosing. There. And now I'm just going to press say 4 at a time and then do the probability thing again. The global track, the track effects doesn't work with the sound locks because they need their own. So what we can do, for example, is choose every alternate one. Let's put those on the left speaker, on the right speaker, and then those on the opposite speaker. Let's make this set a delayed. And let's make this group a loads of reverb and a bit of chorus. Obviously we can do other parameter things like LFO. We can change the LFO on each of those steps, but that LFO would only be affecting the sound. I'll just quickly check the destination. So LFO for those 4. Let's see if there's anything. No, we could probably, for example, change the decay, the filter, not the filter, sorry, access to the amp. Yeah, we can change the delay send, but again, I think that's affecting the sound, not these. We can change the note probability. I'll say the second set. That will then favour that. We could favour a particular sound in here, or even change it. Let's change one of them. Let's say we want more of that one. Let's just turn the probability up. So that plink sound on that one is going to appear more times. And we can change the level of it. We can change the envelope of it. So that becomes like a constant high drone. There's an annoying sound in there. Obviously you can plan this a lot more. It would be nice, like I said, if you could randomise the sounds that it's choosing. And tell me in the comments if you can. And obviously slow the tempo down. Right, this one I'm going to call Steppy Random, and it utilises parameter locks on each of the steps of a very short sequence. I could do a longer one, but I'm just for brevity's sake, I'm just going to do a short one. So it uses the sort of random LFO pitch modulation, which will be different for each of the steps, and then combining that with another oscillator on the same sound. As you probably spotted, all these little mini sound demos are all on one track, so you can imagine you can increase these across all the other tracks as well, of course, as I said in the description. So let's just put in a basic note on this first step, using an initialized sound. I'm going to change it just to a low pass one for now. Right, we're now going to use a parameter lock by pressing that and keeping it on, going to the LFO, and I'm going to choose the pitch modulation for that sound carefully, and then increase the depth. So you can see each step, well, it's effectively using this triangle wave, changing the pitch on that. If I slow it down, you can actually hear the pitch climbing and dropping. Depending on the depth, it will give you the range of the pitch. So if it's at a low depth, high depth, you'll get much more lower to higher. So I'm going to do somewhere in the middle, just for the purposes of this. And I can now copy that parameter lock, which is mostly the LFO, to the others. So press it, copy, paste it onto 2, paste it onto 3, paste it onto 4. And because of the way it's set, of course it's following those, but it's following the sequence up and down on this triangle wave. But I'm going to interrupt it by going to step 2 and change the multiplier. So when it gets to the second one, it does a faster sequence, and the third one, and then the fourth one I'll make super fast, the multiplier. And so that's obviously in a 4-step sequence. I can then, for example, on step 1, using another parameter lock, open up oscillator 2, which is on this C note at the moment. And on the third one, let's open up oscillator 2, but press a different note. So we've now got something quite regimented in there as well. I'll add a sub to that third step. Turn oscillator 2 down a little. A little bit of delay. I'll also do some fixed parameter panning. So step 1 I'll have to the right or left, depending on what you're listening on. So every step is different. I can slow the tempo down so we can hear what's going on a bit better. Bit more delay. And you can still hear the parameter modulation on the pitch is still happening. And the other thing is to obviously introduce perhaps into 5/8, which makes it even more sort of jarring. So it's kind of a rhythmic, interesting rhythmic effect. We can also add noise. Press oscillator 1 twice. We go into the noise menu. Perhaps slow it down even more. A bit more reverb. So this one I'm going to call Richochet, and it utilizes the ability for oscillator 1. I'm still on initialize. I'll start with the initialize sound, which we all know and love. So oscillator 1 is going to use this waveform called feedback, FDB, which kind of feeds the output from the ladder filter back into the oscillator. So this is what a normal sawtooth sounds like. If we then go into feedback, it's now got the filter being fed back into it, which produces that sort of quite punchy sound. But it also means that the filter itself is now going to control the pitch. So you can see that the actual filter frequency is now controlling the pitch of itself. So as I lower the frequency, it's actually reducing the harmonic content of it as well. So what that means is, if we then modulate that, I'm going to put it into infinite sustain again, so I can keep it going. Let's lower the level a bit. Let's check on the level. That's not too bad. So now when I go into the LFO, if I now modulate the frequency, and it's on a triangle wave at the moment, set it to sine or square. So I quite like saw, and all of a sudden we get this this sort of tom sound. And obviously the multiplier is set to a very fixed rate at the moment. If I change that, kind of simulating. I'm simulating the effect of the multiplier. So let's go to LFO 2, and then make the destination the multiplier of LFO 1. And I'll change the actual multiplier of the modulator I'm reducing, so it's not changing it as much as it was just then. And I could potentially change the waveform of the modulator. I know it's getting confusing, but this is LFO 2 controlling the multiplication of LFO 1. If I make that square, for example, we get these sort of definite changes, and then the usual bit of sprinkling of effects on it. Works particularly well with a longer delay. Of course, if we go into the sound and change the attack a little, now let's change LFO2 to random. And make the start multiplier of sound 1 a bit less. We can suddenly get it's quite nice feel. I'll let that run for a bit. Right, this one I'm going to call Cacophony Drone, and again it's using one track. You can imagine obviously doing all of these on separate tracks and you get really crazy. This one perhaps would benefit from doing each oscillator on separate tracks and then panning them in stereo. But this one utilizes the fact that each oscillator can have a different LFO on it. So so oscillator 1, initial sound as usual. We will let's put it into infinite release mode, and then we're now going to oscillate the level of I'll speak properly. We're going to modulate the level of oscillator 1 using a random waveform at a pretty slow rate. I'll filter this again into low pass mode just so we haven't got that harshness. So that's a random on and off. Likewise with oscillator 2, which I'll turn up. Perhaps a lower, let's make it a bit lower so more drony. So you can hear at the moment oscillator 2, let's turn oscillator 1 down. Oscillator 2 is just a single drone as well. But let's utilize LFO2 to do the same thing, which is oscillator 2. Obviously this is a different destination, oscillator 2 level. And random waveform. That pitch. Now bring in oscillator 1 again. And now we've got the two of them coming in and out at different times. If we add a little delay just to stereoize it slightly, bring the filter up a bit. now, because we've got two LFOs, we can also use the second destination of each of them to control the frequency. So on oscillator 1 there, I'm asking it to, at the same time it's lifting the level, to also increase the filter. But this works better if I turn the filters down. It becomes more obvious. In fact, I'll make oscillator 1 have a sub part of it as well, and I'll even let's detune it up there. So you can now hear the two oscillators. Oscillator 2 likewise is on LFO 2, so we'll lift. I'm actually going to pan that one just so you can differentiate it. And I think we'll have the fifth on that one. A bit of reverb. This may benefit from being slower, so one thing I can do, I don't know if you noticed, as I was slowing it down there, the delay had an interesting effect. So, instead of panning oscillator 2 and LFO 2, I'll change it to the delay time. So we've got amp. So let's find it. Delay send. I don't think I've got delay time as an option. So I'll just use delay send. This will just now send more of both of them to the delay on and off. So this one I'm going to call Sequence Portal. It's an interesting wave routing thing that you can do on the Analog 4. So you basically on oscillator, on one of the track sounds, on oscillator 2, you can choose a waveform which is oddly called NEI, and this basically takes the sound or sequence from track 1 and plays it through the oscillator. So you can see on track 2 here I've got the oscillator set to NEI, but we'll leave that for the moment, it's turned down. We'll go back to track 1. What we'll do is entering a sequence on track 1, and I'll do that in step mode. I'll just use 4 steps for now, just to keep it nice and short. So play that back. I'll change the sound a bit so it's a little less sharp. Give a bit more Right, and now if we turn that track down, and we go to track 2, oscillator 2, and it's on Ni, and you can hear what I'm playing there is actually oscillator 1. So I'm going to turn oscillator 1 down and oscillator 2 up. So what we have now, excuse me, is track 1 playing through an input into oscillator 2 on this track. And it's only obviously triggered, or it only plays when I play oscillator 2 note. And this allows us to do traditional things like, for example, bring oscillator 1 back in, still on track 2 sound. Bring oscillator 1 back in. Which is, you know, you can do some musical things with that. But the sound coming in is also affected by the filter, so and the amp envelopes and things like that. So let's filter that sound. So you can do some interesting things. Obviously, let's get the LFO going. Let's get it automatically filtering that sequence coming through. For example, and perhaps a random waveform. So it's a real interesting way of mangling the sound using the LFO. We can also, if I put this on infinite sustain, we can also, infinite release rather, we can also get it to adjust the volume as well on the LFO. So let's choose a destination of oscillator 2 level and put that on the same as the filter as well. And now I've got it on infinite release. Bit of delay. We can change the attack so it's less biting when it comes in. Now, of course, we can then bring in, say, oscillator 1 of track 2 to provide some background for this as well. So I'll take oscillator 1 off just so you can hear the track 1 being fed into track 2. Another thing we can do, last thing of course, is on the sequence itself we can make all steps, make the notes, give them a probability so they're not going to play all the time. Again, on oscillator, on the filter on this one, we can mangle it even further. And by using the second filter resonance, we can give it a little bit of percussive quality. And then I'll play some notes on oscillator 1.